Welcome. You've joined us for another deep dive, and today we're digging into something you brought up an article from moveandstay.com.
That's right. And these folks, moveandstay.com, they've been around for, what, over 25 years? Helping business travelers, expats, basically anyone needing a place in Asia, short or long term.
Exactly. A real fixture in that market. And this article you shared zeroes in on service departments, specifically comparing Hong Kong and Singapore. So that's our focus today.
Yep. We want to really unpack the costs. It's not just about saying, oh, this one's more expensive. We need to understand why,
Yeah.
What are the factors? What are the trade-offs?
Right. What does moveandstay.com tell us about what drives those numbers?
Exactly. And what does it mean for you, the listener, if you're actually thinking about booking one of these places?
Absolutely. Whether it's for a work trip, maybe a relocation, or maybe you're just curious about these two massive Asian hubs.
We'll tackle those key questions. Is Hong Kong or Singapore going to hit the wallet harder for a service department? What do you actually get for your money?
And what are the bigger trends? moveandstay.com must have seen a lot change over 25 years. Okay, let's dive in.
All right, so the moveandstay.com piece gives us a starting point with some average monthly rents. For Hong Kong, they're quoting roughly $2,000 to $4,000 US dollars a month.
Okay. And Singapore?
Singapore trends a bit higher, generally $2,500 up to maybe $5,000 USD per month.
Yeah.
So yeah, on average, Singapore looks a touch more expensive, according to their data.
That's the headline number, isn't it? Singapore edging out Hong Kong on average price?
It seems so. But averages only tell you so much, right?
Exactly. Anyone who's apartment hunted knows that. So the moveandstay.com article then digs into why prices vary in both cities.
And it comes down to the usual suspects, really. Things you'd expect in any big city. Location is obviously a massive one.
Always. Prime real estate costs prime money.
Right. If you want to be right in the city center or the main business district in either Hong Kong or Singapore, moveandstay.com's listings will reflect that premium. You pay for that access.
Makes total sense. Convenience costs, then there's just
Yeah.
the size, right? How big the place is.
Yep. Simple as that. A studio versus a two-bedroom. Naturally, the two-bedroom costs more. Your space needs directly impact the price tag you'll see listed on moveandstay.com.
And the third big one they mention, amenities.
Absolutely.
Huh?
Does the building have a pool?
Yeah.
A gym?
Yeah.
Concierge? moveandstay.com highlights that these extras add value, but they also add to the rent. You're buying into a lifestyle, not just the apartment.
It's that whole package deal. Okay, but what if you're trying not to spend top dollar? Does moveandstay.com suggest there are, more budget-friendly plays?
Yes, they do. And this is where their specific examples are useful. For Hong Kong, they actually name-drop yin service departments
Okay.
as an example of getting comfort at a lower price point. The figure mentioned is around $212 USD, though we'd need to double-check on moveandstay.com if that's per night or some other average.
Right, got to check the details on the site. But it shows options exist. What about finding deals in Singapore?
In Singapore, moveandstay.com suggests looking a bit further out from the absolute center. You might have more of a commute, but the trade-off is potentially lower rent. Their listings likely show that price difference pretty clearly depending on the neighborhood.
Okay, so location and amenities drive price, but you can find value if you adjust your priorities. Let's talk about what's inside the apartment. What does moveandstay.com say is typical?
Well, one of the big draws, and moveandstay.com listings almost always feature this, is the kitchen, or at least a kitchenette.
Huge advantage over a hotel room, especially for longer stays like the ones moveandstay.com caters to.
Definitely. Being able to cook saves money, caters to diets.
Yeah.
It's a big plus. And you generally get more space, too.
Like a separate living area.
Exactly. It feels less temporary, more like a proper home base. And then the modern conveniences are usually standard high-speed internet, flat-screen TV.
Maybe even some smart home tech popping up in newer places listed on moveandstay.com.
Yeah, things like keyless entry, smart controls, that's becoming more common. Plus, housekeeping is usually part of the deal.
Right, that's key. How often typically?
moveandstay.com often notes weekly cleaning is common, but you can usually arrange for more if you need it. It's that blend of home comfort and hotel service.
Now, moveandstay.com, with their long experience, probably sees some subtle differences between the style of offerings in Hong Kong versus Singapore. Anything stand out there?
It's quite interesting, actually. The article suggests Hong Kong might have more places leaning into things like roof gardens or BBQ facilities.
Taking advantage of those skyline views.
Exactly. Given how dense Hong Kong is, maximizing that outdoor space with a view makes a lot of sense. You see that reflected in some moveandstay.com listings.
Okay. And Singapore.
Singapore seems to emphasize integrating nature more. Think lush greenery, maybe eco-friendly designs. It fits that whole garden city image.
Huh. So green space versus cityscape could actually be a differentiator depending on the property's moveandstay.com features.
Potentially, yeah. It hints at slightly different lifestyle priorities, maybe.
And we mentioned amenities driving cost. There's a real range, isn't there, from basic to a super luxury.
Oh, absolutely. At the top end, moveandstay.com will list places with infinity pools, full concierge services, maybe even private chefs available.
Wow. Serious luxury.
Comes with a serious price tag, of course.
Hmm.
But then on the more budget-friendly end, you still get the essentials. A clean space, your kitchen, internet.
Just maybe not the infinity pool.
Probably not, no.
Yeah.
But perfect for practicality and value, especially for those longer stays moveandstay.com users often need.
Let's get more specific on locations. Moveandstay.com obviously maps everything out. For Hong Kong Central, Wan Chai, Causeway Bay, what are the vibes?
Okay, Central is the financial heartland. Think corporate HQs, high-end dining, prime spot for business travelers browsing moveandstay.com. Wan Chai is more lively, nightlife, plus the convention center is there.
Right.
Causeway Bay is huge for shopping, tons of restaurants, entertainment, very busy.
And then Kennedy Town, Happy Valley.
Those tend to be a bit more residential, maybe a touch quieter, but still really well connected. And Tsim Sha Tsui on the Kowloon side, that's big for culture, shopping, those amazing harbor views. MoveAndStay.com lets you filter by all these areas.
Got it. Switching to Singapore, Orchard Road, Marina Bay, Sentosa are key areas moveandstay.com would feature.
Right, Orchard Road is the shopping street.
Yeah.
Miles of malls. If you love retail therapy, that's your spot. Marina Bay is more sleek, modern, finance-focused with those iconic views.
And Sentosa.
Sentosa is the island getaway. Beaches, theme parks, resorts. Great for leisure or families, maybe less practical for daily commute to the CBD. But MoveAndStay.com would list options there too.
And for the core business traveler using moveandstay.com, proximity to the CBD is key in both cities, right? Central Admiralty in Hong Kong, CBD Raffles Place in Singapore.
Absolutely critical for many. That convenience factor being close to meetings, offices often outweighs a slightly higher price found on moveandstay.com for those central locations.
Okay, so we've covered price ranges, drivers, amenities, locations, all through the lens of what moveandstay.com shows. Now, let's bring it back to you, the listener. How do you use this info on a site like moveandstay.com to choose?
First step is really nailing down your own needs. How much space? Traveling solo or with family? Need a workspace? Is a full kitchen essential? Use those filters on moveandstay.com.
Don't just look at the price. Got it.
Exactly. Then think about length of stay. MoveAndStay.com often highlights better rates for longer bookings, but also check the cancellation policy carefully. They can be stricter than hotels sometimes.
Good point.
Right.
Flexibility matters. What about families or pet owners using moveandstay.com?
Yeah, definitely check specifics. Need a crib? Ask. Bringing a pet, you absolutely have to confirm the property's policy. MoveAndStay.com usually has filters for family-friendly or pet-friendly, which helps a lot.
Okay. Now, stepping back a bit, moveandstay.com has been watching this market for 25 plus years. What are the bigger picture dynamics they're likely seeing?
Well, the article points to pretty significant projected growth for the whole serviced apartment market in Asia. We're talking big numbers over the next decade.
Driven by
Business travel, expats. The core clientele moveandstay.com has always served. That demand keeps growing.
and in places like Hong Kong and Singapore.
That high demand hits limited supply, especially in those super popular areas. Basic economics, really. It keeps prices relatively high in the prime spots you see on moveandstay.com.
The article also mentioned co-living spaces. How do they fit in? Are they competitors moveandstay.com needs to consider?
They're definitely part of the ecosystem now, more budget-focused, more community-oriented. You get a smaller private space, but share larger communal areas.
So a different value proposition than a traditional serviced apartment listed on moveandstay.com.
Exactly. It appeals to a different crowd, maybe younger professionals, or those really prioritizing cost and social connection over, say, a private kitchen.
Interesting. What about the underlying economic factors in each city that moveandstay.com would have navigated over the years?
For Hong Kong, the article mentions the high cost of land and strict regulations. That's always been a factor, limiting supply and keeping prices up, as reflected on moveandstay.com.
All right, land scarcity is a perennial issue there.
Yeah.
Singapore?
Singapore benefits from its economic stability and strong tourism, driving demand. But it can also be more exposed to Global economic wobbles, which could impact occupancy rates MoveInStay.com sees. Plus, sustainability is becoming a bigger deal in both cities.
Eco-friendly features are starting to matter more.
Definitely. You might see that highlighted more in listings on platforms like MoveInStay.com going forward.
So for someone weighing options, how do serviced apartments booked via MoveAndStay.com stack up against, say, hotels or just renting a regular flat?
Compared to hotels, serviced apartments generally offer way more space and that kitchen flexibility, especially key for longer stays that MoveAndStay.com specializes in. You feel less like you're living out of a suitcase.
More room, more like home. What about the cost versus hotels for longer stays?
Often it can be more cost-effective. You get more square footage. The ability to cook saves money. So for a month or more, MoveAndStay.com options can be better value.
And versus a traditional unfurnished rental apartment, which MoveAndStay.com might also list.
The big advantages of serviced apartments are convenience and flexibility. They're furnished, utilities are usually included, lease terms are shorter, much less hassle setting up, especially for expats using MoveAndStay.com to land smoothly.
Less commitment, easier move-in. Makes sense. The article also touched on who the main providers are, something MoveAndStay.com deals with daily. Hong Kong versus Singapore.
Hong Kong's market seems dominated by the big property developers. They control a lot of the inventory. Smaller boutique places exist, but maybe with fewer bells and whistles.
And Singapore.
Seems a bit more mixed there. A blend of big international chains and local operators. Probably gives users on MoveAndStay.com a wider variety of styles and price points to choose from.
Finally, technology. What's changing there that MoveAndStay.com might be reflecting?
Things like keyless entry, smart home controls for lighting, heating, it's becoming more integrated. Adds convenience, appeals to the tech-savvy crowd, booking through sites like MoveAndStay.com.
Okay, let's pull this all together. Based on this deep dive, fueled by the MoveAndStay.com article, what are the main takeaways for our listener comparing Hong Kong and Singapore service departments?
Well, the headline is, Singapore averages are often higher. But that's just an average. Both cities have a huge range. What you actually pay depends massively on location, amenities, how long you stay.
So you really need to use a platform like MoveAndStay.com to compare specific properties based on your needs.
Exactly. Hong Kong can be cheaper than hotels for long stays, but finding true budget options in prime spots might take some digging on MoveAndStay.com.
It really comes down to personal priorities, doesn't it? Space, budget, location, length of stay. You've got to weigh those up when you're browsing MoveAndStay.com.
Absolutely. Define what matters most to you, then search accordingly.
And thinking longer term,
Yeah.
it does make you wonder, right? With this constant demand for flexible living that MoveAndStay.com has catered to for decades, plus co-living and sustainability growing, how will that keep reshaping the market in places like Hong Kong and Singapore?
That's the big question, isn't it? How these trends influence what gets built, what gets listed on MoveAndStay.com, and ultimately what options are available in these incredibly dynamic cities down the line. Definitely something to keep an eye on.